sound is.
Nick Athanasiou, this looks very different to what we normally do, mate. What's going on?
I know. Look, it was a bolt of lightning, would you believe? Bright Sands wiped out my internet. We had to change locations. Would you believe?
The Distillery 2.0.
It is, mate. It's probably Zeus come down with his bolt of lightning and said, I've had enough of this. 30 episodes at Brighton. We live in a Doll's Point.
Yeah, I know. Absolutely.
Mate, not that I'm complaining. How good is Dimitra with this plate of food? Better than what I've produced back at Brighton.
She's done all right. She's done all right. I feel sorry for our guests to some degree because we've got a pretty good spread here at the moment, and unfortunately, all they can do is look at it through the screen. But we apologise for that. But like I said, this is a very different show because we are actually doing this for the very first time remotely because our guests are actually in the UK. And we needed to do that, I think, because there are just some people, Phil Hellenes, and people who are doing really important work on the sort of periphery of the Greek community as well right now, isn't there?
Definitely. And look, our guests are right behind a very passionate topic that Greeks are talking about daily, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we introduce our guests? If you're at all interested in the Parthenon Marbles and the 200-year plus calls for them to be returned from the British Museum to Athens, chances are you'll have heard about this amazing story that came up in 2022. After requesting permission from the British Museum to scan the Parthenon marbles in the Defying gallery in order to make millimetre-perfect copies in marble, our two guests from the Institute for Digital Archaeology received word that their request had been denied. But that didn't stop them. Believing strongly that the museum didn't have the right to deny their request in the spirit of collegiality, a plan was hatched to scan the marbles anyway, using only smartphones and iPads, and in full view of museum staff. The story drew plenty of attention internationally, especially at the back end of 2022, when the Institute unveiled the result of the guerrilla tactics, an incredible copy of the Selene Horse in Pentelic Marble that Phidias himself would no doubt have been proud of. Joining us today remotely from London, we're incredibly proud to have the founder and executive director of the Institute for Digital Archaeology, Roger Michel, and Director of Technology, Alexy Karenowska. Welcome, guys.
Hello, Tom and Nick, nice to see you.
Hi there.
We're so glad to have you guys both here.
Tom, we've been talking about this story for a while, and it's great. We finally tracked the original people who were behind it all. Went into the British Museum. But look, I'm sure we're going to talk about that, and Roger and Alexy will have a lot of stories for us. But yes, unbelievable.
It's going to be a great little discussion. I think we should get into the episode properly. What do you reckon?
Definitely, mate. Let's kick it off.
Guys, Stini Yamas, cheers. I'm not sure if you've got a coffee there with you or, it's obviously early in the morning there in the UK. What time is it here? It's about 9. Oh, there it is.
Good stuff, Roger.
For those who can't see, the bottle of wine's just been shown. You haven't got that open right now, do you, Roger?
Well, I've got the it's a bottle of good Greek wine, and I've got the bottle opener here. So if I do get parched, I'll have something on hand.
It is a good bottle too. It's the Xinomavro, which is a fantastic drop.
It is a great drop. I believe Milloway have that as well.
They do have that. Yeah, we get a lot of good produce imported here to Australia. We're very lucky that way. The vast Greek community here, so there's good call for it. Let's get into the meat of it. Talk to us a little bit about what the Institute for Digital Archaeology actually does. It sounds like a contradiction in terms to say digital and archaeology in the same sentence. What is it all about?
Alexy, do you want to take this? You want me to have a shot at it?
Sure, yeah. So we're all about really the use of digital technologies in the context, actually not just of archaeology, but of cultural heritage more broadly. So we do a lot of work connected with traditional archaeology, so digging things out of the ground and looking at them afterwards. But we also do a lot of work that sits sort of at the interface between culture and high tech. So we do a lot of scanning, we do a lot of 3D modelling, as you've already talked about. We also work with other tools like sort of X-rays, We do a lot of microscopy. We really right across the kind of technology board and also right across the board of cultural and archaeological activities. And we're also very active in the context of people's engagement with both technology and culture. So a lot of our projects, like the one we're going to talk about today, have a very strong kind of social element. And it means a lot to us to work with and on projects that have important groups of stakeholders who have a real stake in the culture or the archaeology or the combination of that culture and archaeology and science.
And has that been by design, like picking those particular projects to be part of? Is it a duty of care from you guys? What's actually driving this?
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly the driving force behind creating the organization. We knew we would do a raft of interesting technical projects, and we do month in and month out: marine archaeology, in-ground archaeology. We've been in Westminster Abbey the last few weeks reconstructing a terracotta altarpiece created by a fellow called Torgiano, who made himself famous by breaking Michelangelo's nose and having to get out of Italy in a hurry, and he made a home for himself in the UK and created some beautiful artwork here. So we do lots of as I say, technical projects that don't get a lot of publicity, but I think our heart is really mostly in these larger social justice projects that are, in fact, as Alexy says, dedicated to improving the lives of identified groups of stakeholders. The Palmyra Arch project, which was a huge success, raised billions of dollars of aid. Eventually, our arch was on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. It was at the United Nations. It was at the G7. It really changed the conversation around the conflict in Syria, and specifically around refugee issues and heritage issues connected with that conflict. So those are the kinds of projects that I think we get most excited about for obvious reasons, because I think archaeology is great. Science it changes the lives of people all the time, but I think it's important for people to get a sense for how exactly that's happening, how science can be put into the service of humanity. And I think we're very much in the business of both making science work for people, but at the same time letting people know those things are happening so they can appreciate the impact that it has on their lives and their communities. So the big high-profile projects, I think, to some degree, are the ones that we feel personally most passionate about.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, Rod, just want to go back to the beginning. So you're the founder of the Institute. Do you want to tell us how it all started, and maybe give us a bit of a deep dive on what the technology is? And were you involved with creating the technology?
Yeah, so this sort of grew very gradually. I studied at Oxford with a wonderful scholar called Eric Stanley. He was a Tolkien successor as the Old English professor here at Oxford, and he I eventually drifted away, went into the practice of law on the government side, but all those years from the early 1990s into the early 2000s, I kept my hand in through Eric and through projects that we did together. Most of my interest was in the area of early manuscripts, and we early on developed some imaging technologies that were interesting insofar as they involved getting some sort of devices that ordinarily are tied to clean rooms and to museum spaces out into the field, because sometimes you can't bring things into the laboratory. You have to go to the mountain, as it were, and so that was I suppose how this all began to evolve by developing these portable technologies. When ISIS all of a sudden in the mid 2010s began to take sledgehammers to heritage objects on YouTube, we realized that being able to get imaging technology in particular into the field to be able to document some of these at-risk objects was going to be hugely important in terms of finding a way to preserve at least the memory of these objects, if not reconstruct them at some point down the road. And so that's exactly what we did. And I think at that point there was sort of an inflection point for the organization. What had previously been something that I pursued as at a purely avocational level, eventually morphed into something which first Alexy and then eventually I made into a vocation. So it's been a slow progression, but a fairly clear progression from using imaging technology in library spaces, in private collections, getting these devices out of the laboratory into people's homes, into collections that are otherwise inaccessible, developing imaging technologies that have the capability to produce really high quality results, but in the field. And then suddenly, when public events required it, we suddenly were able to pivot and apply these technologies to these conflict zones in a way that I think has been very effective. 2012 was the birth of the organization as an organization, but in 2012 it was still operating at quite a modest level. And again, at that point, was mostly focused on small objects, manuscripts. We also collected quite a few oral histories around that time. These were, as I said, this was really the very beginnings of the organization. It did not have the public face that it has today. It was really only starting in 2016, 2017. We began to take on these more ambitious projects, and especially the larger.
So, what do you mean by oral history? Is this like someone telling you how describing a particular item looked like, and you somehow created it?
We realized that there was for whatever reason, in demographics, who can say what drives demographics, but in the early 20-teens, we all of a sudden realized that there was a whole generation of really extraordinary classic scholars who were quite elderly, and folks who had changed their respective fields in important ways. Elaine Fantham and Jasper Griffin and Sir John Boardman. I mean, these are the great legends of archaeology and classics and ancient history. Peter Brown. And our concern was that these were all folks who at that time were in their 80s, mid 80s, and some beyond. Everybody's life is limited at some point, and we thought it might be a good idea to begin to collect some oral histories from these folks who might not be around in 10 or 15 or 20 years. And so we created a database of oral histories with prominent classicists, archaeologists, ancient historians that is still accessible on our website today. And sadly, but not unsurprisingly, a number of those folks now in 2023 are no longer with us. And we're so happy to have captured, in some cases, 3 or 4 hours worth of material about their ambitions, their priorities, how they think what impact they thought they had on their respective fields. So it was a great project and one that we're very proud of, but an example of how I think we had a sense that we had a public mission, pursued it in a quiet way in those early years, and eventually those quiet approaches turned into much louder approaches that people read about in the newspaper.
What an important project as well to be able to document and archive these things. Why was it so important for you guys to be able to do something like that?
Well, I think for both of us, we benefited ourselves mightily from having mentors from prior generations. Eric passed away just a few years ago in his early 90s. So I think both of us have a lot of respect for and appreciation for the prior generations of scholars who made our work in so many ways possible. And I think also we have a sense for the scarcity of intellectual resources, whether it's heritage objects that we document and conserve, or whether it's human resources that we document and conserve. There's a sense that these things, are not always going to be around. I think people to some degree had started to take cultural heritage materials for granted in a way. I mean, you look at these things; they've been around for thousands of years. If you go to Lebanon, you go to London. I mean, you go to any place where there are ancient monuments that are on public display, and there's a sense of timelessness about them, like they will be around forever. And I think, if nothing else, ISIS taught us that that's not necessarily true. That these things can be wiped from the face of the earth, just like human beings eventually pass from the face of the earth. And it's really important to find ways to document these objects in ways that make them accessible in important ways. And I think that these oral histories were not superficial. These were many, many hours of conversations, and those many, many hours of conversations that are in our archive are distilled from even longer conversations that transpired in the moment. And so I think they are of a piece with the documentation we do with respect to physical objects. It's with the understanding that even these mighty structures made of stone, I mean, look at the city of Palmyra, that a bunch of lunatics with dynamite and sledgehammers can go in there and remove that material in the course of days, weeks, or months. And so it's important to find ways to make sure that we have. And the beauty of digital is that, while it seems quite ephemeral, these are just little bits of electricity passing through wires, as people learn to their joy or their consternation, things live forever in the electronic universe. And so the hope is that as permanent as these mighty stone edifices are sitting on the face of the earth, they may even be more permanent in digital form.
Well, you mentioned Palmyra there, and I'm interested to get your guys' perspective on this because, I mean, for people like us who are not connected to Syria in any sort of way, we were shocked by the footage and the photos and the aftermath of what happened there. How shocking was it for you guys to see such an important heritage site be demolished and treated in such a way?
Yeah, it was, of course, extremely shocking. I mean, it's, as Roger said, I think a lot of people, it challenged people's faith, if you like, to some extent, in the longevity of these sites, of these objects. But I think even more than that, one of the things that we spend a lot of time exploring as an organisation, and that sort of sits, I suppose, at the heart of these projects, is people's relationships with the objects. And in a way, the Palmyra project, although it was, a project which was by its nature very physical, so, here we took this deconstructed arch and we reconstructed it. I think the most important part of that project to us was actually using that new physical object as a way of exploring beyond the superficial, people's relationship with that culture and with that heritage. So, in other words, on the one hand, I think what we wanted to do was to draw attention to the importance and fragility of these ancient objects, but also make sure that people connect with the fact that, these objects it's very easy to put these objects on a pedestal and sort of turn them into museum-style objects of academic curiosity. So people write articles about them, they write papers about them, they kind of turn them into intellectualized objects, particularly in the West, where, as you said, we don't have an everyday connection to these objects. To us, they are part of a kind of cultural tradition that's connected to our own, but it's not right here. We don't kind of open the windows and see it. But I think what we wanted to underline was the fact that these objects are much, much more than that. They are actually part of a living culture. They're part of people's everyday experience. And it's that living culture and everyday experience which was really under threat from, the Islamic State militants and those individuals who sought to destroy this cultural property. So for us, it's always about objects, but it's about very specifically objects and their connection to real people in the here and now.
What I'll also say, in terms of the question that you asked about what our reaction was to seeing these images of ISIS destroying these 1,000, 2,000-year-old objects, I mean, what I will say is that, of course, it was horrible to watch that, but it was, in the end, like that scene in Star Wars where Obi-Wan Kenobi says to Darth Vader, "If you strike me down, I'll become more powerful than I ever was." And the truth is that while it was horrific to see what ISIS did in Syria and has done more broadly in the region, that those actions stimulated a focus on cultural heritage conservation, protection that nobody could have anticipated. It unlocked this international coalition of ranging from look, we stood in front of the U.S. Capitol with our Palmyra Arch, and it was in the middle of the very contentious Supreme Court nomination hearings. And in spite of that, we had a Democrat and a Republican, the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce, and a Republican, and the ranking member Eliot Engel, a Democrat, both standing under the arch, both speaking passionately about the crucial importance of preserving world heritage, and then having those two guys walk back into Congress, the U.S. Congress, and on a voice vote, at a time when nothing was passing on a voice vote, push through this massive Syria aid bill. And it was just an extraordinary example of how what those folks what ISIS did in Syria, to the extent that they were hoping that would somehow, I don't know, provide a template for eradicating cultural heritage, it turned out to be an extraordinary boon to international support for preserving cultural heritage. I mean, within a year or so of introducing our arch or inaugurating our arch on Trafalgar Square, I was standing during General Assembly week outside the General Assembly Hall with the President of the Security Council, the President of the General Assembly, and the Deputy Secretary General. And we would have had the Secretary General there if he hadn't been called away for a Syria-related matter. but talking about these issues in front of hundreds of gathered ambassadors, and then within days or no more than a week, the UN General Assembly voted on a vote of, I think, 122 to 13, the most sweeping sanctions against Syria that they have ever passed before or since. So, I think to the extent that ISIS had the idea that they might somehow blot this chapter of Syrian history from the history books, they couldn't have been more wrong, because all it did was galvanize international support in a way that I couldn't anticipate. I don't think anybody could, in a way that continues to this day. The number of organizations like ours that have popped up around the world that are dedicated to preserving, conserving, and telling people about cultural heritage has multiplied 100-fold. So it really is that Obi-Wan Kenobi moment where Darth Vader hits him with a lightsaber, and boom, suddenly he's everywhere and he's everything. It was a transformational moment, but not in the way that ISIS had hoped. I don't think. Exactly the opposite.
You know the way to my heart, Roger. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, so thank you for the reference. But look, what an amazing thing to be a part of, though. Honestly, I mean, you think archaeology, and you know, most people will think fossils, most people are thinking digs, most people are thinking this. I mean, the work that you're doing is having real world impacts at the moment, and was instrumental in some way, in a symbolic sense, influencing policy. And not only that, changing the hearts and minds of the people, who you needed to change. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I think it was the lessons of the Palmyra project that made us realize that this approach, this general approach, might be very well suited to changing people's minds about this 200-year-old Elgin dispute. It was really the Elgin project was absolutely a direct outgrowth of the Palmyra project, no question.
Mm. Yeah. Look, I'm just fascinated about the technology. So if we talk about the arch that you built, is it just from photos? You punch these photos into this software that you've got, and this robot starts carving this out from a piece of marble? How does it all work? And how quick did it take to build this arch?
Alexy, do you want to, as the director of technology?
Essentially, yes. It's not quite so easy as that, but you got the process absolutely spot on. So what we did in the case of the Arch project, that object had already been very badly damaged, almost destroyed, in fact, at the time that we started to try to reconstruct it. And the first part of the reconstruction process is completely digital. So what we did was we crowdsourced many photographs of the object, and we used those photographs in a process called photogrammetry, which is basically a technique where you take lots of photographs of an object from lots of different angles and use those two-dimensional representations, many of them, to create a three-dimensional representation of the structure. So that was the first thing we did. We took all those photographs and we created a digital model of the structure. Now, it's not quite so easy as sort of handing them to some software and pressing a button. There are some really cool tools available now. That kind of software is getting better and better, and I'm sure you may have played with apps on your iPhone actually that do that now. It's getting very, very clever, and every year it sort of gets exponentially better. But in our case, we used a whole suite of different kinds of software, and also some very skilled people who were able to really optimize that process and create a really high quality model based on the evidence that we had. So we start with that digital model, and that digital model is just a shell. So people might be familiar. In fact, if you have played with one of these apps, you'll see that what you're really doing is recreating just the surface of the object, which is great if you just want to kind of look around it, but not so great if you actually want to create a physical object. So the next job is to kind of inject some engineering. So what we did was we kind of solidified the object. We did a set of engineering calculations to make sure that we could make it in a sensible kind of way, so that it wasn't going to fall down or cause other sorts of problems. And then we took that digital model and a set of really sophisticated robotic carving tools. So these are essentially robots with many degrees of freedom. They look a little bit like the robots that you see on car production lines, actually. And they take that digital model We offer them up through another piece of software that translates that sort of three-dimensional object into a series of moves with cutting tools over the surface of a block of stone. And yeah, basically we cut it from the solid. Now that project happened very quickly. So we had a lot of discussion with our stakeholders in the region about which object we wanted to recreate, how we were going to do it, etc. And I guess we were having those discussions into the beginning of 2016. But we started on the production process at the beginning of February, essentially. So the 1st of February, we had nothing. We had an idea. And then it went on to Trafalgar Square on the 15th of April. The opening was the 16th. So basically, from the beginning of February to the middle of April was our window. So pretty quick.
The only thing I'll add to that is that I think the world press, and there are thousands of stories written about this project. That the Times did 3,000 words. The front page of the Science Times on the same day as the Webb telescope went live. Our Oxford colleagues were not so pleased about that, but they got a little box in the corner. And,
well, that's Elgin.
Yeah, sorry.
That was Elgin.
But what I'll say about the and I'm talking generally about the use of the robots, is that the world press has focused on the robot angle, and these robots are incredibly cute, incredibly charismatic. I mean, they look like the Millennium. They look like the Imperial stormtroopers in Star Wars. They're white.
I'm sensing a theme here, Roger.
I think every time I see them, but the truth is that the robots do about 95% of the carving, and then it's artists and artisans in Carrara, steps away from where Michelangelo had his workshop, and these are true artists. They're the ones who do that crucial final 5% where the real artistry lies. And I think if Phidias were alive today, because Phidias, there's a lot of work being done at the moment on sort of understanding what kinds of tools he had at his disposal, what kind of steel he had at his disposal in particular, and the kinds of techniques that he used to produce these incredible objects that he created in the 5th century BC. The reality is that a lot of prep work was done using machines, using assistants, and I'm 100% confident that if Phidias had these robots at his disposal in the 5th century BC, given the volume of work he was being called upon to produce, absolutely would have loved it, would have used it, and would have produced art of exactly the same quality, because still it's that final 5% where you put on the surface finish, which is the all-important dimension of any artwork. That's all done by hand. So I think while the John Henry versus the steam drill idea is very appealing, I think, to folks who write stories about this project, and there is no question that's a big part of it. But what sometimes is omitted is the focus on the final step, which is the artistic step, done artisanally by people using hand tools and their eye, and that's what really gives these sculptures, I think, their magic, is that final step of the process, which is often overlooked.
That's fascinating, because you're quite right. That's something that they haven't really focused on in a lot of the literature or a lot of the stories that have been written. I imagine that there's a lot of hand sanding, for example, of fine tuning and polishing and all these types of things that a machine simply couldn't do.
Absolutely, and look, we have to give full marks. The magic that TorArt and Robotor, our partners in Carrara, create using this robot technology, which is truly unique to them. There are a lot of companies that use automated systems for carving marble, but what Robotor and TorArt do is beyond anything that I'm aware of that anybody else is doing. Truly extraordinary. These people are magicians, but they also understand that art involves the work of human beings as well, and they've got some of the most highly skilled artisans working in their workshop that do produce those final steps. And I should say that Robotor and TorArt produce the monumental sculptures for artists like Damien Hirst and Jeff Koons. These are sculptures that sell for millions of dollars. These are the world's great sculptural artists. So these guys are at the absolute zenith of their game, cheek by jowl with the Selene Horse when it was in the workshop were sculptures by Koons and Hirst. So these are real artworks they're producing. These are not simply machine reproductions. This is genuine art, and like I say, no one would ever look at a one of those extraordinary monumental marble sculptures by Jeff Koons and say, hey, that's that's a robot made that. Jeff Koons made that. So these, yeah. I think there has been. For reasons that I get, that the technology is fascinating. It is crucial to the process. Just like Phineas, the technology he used, getting the stuff up there in the first place was extraordinary. I mean, technology is always a part of this, but the artistry sometimes does get overlooked, and I think it has a little bit here. But what I'll say is that we left Carrara weeks before we received the Selene Horse, a finished product in London, and it was magnificent to look at it on the platform as carved by the robot. But to me, it still lacked the magic of the Selene Horse in the British Museum. And then over the course of 4 or 5 weeks, their artists had a go at it and did all of that crucial final work. And when Alexy and I opened that wooden casket, this huge wooden box, when it arrived with the horse inside, it was like it just popped. The magic was there. We were looking at what was truly a new Selene Horse, and it really was an amazing moment to see that transformation from our memory of the machine carving, like I say, 95%, but that last 5%, all the magic was there.
Wow, unbelievable. Well, look, let's talk about the Parthenon marbles, or often referred to as the Elgin marbles, incorrectly as Greeks, as you might guess. But for us, we may be biased. How important are those sculptures, do you believe? Number one, to Greeks, but also to Western civilization in general.
There's no question. I mean, it's for whatever reason, whether it's the Statue of Liberty in the United States or the Parthenon sculptures in Greece. Sometimes particular objects come to embody a huge number of things: the national pride, national history, social values that I think we all find important, and forget about what country you're living in. The democracy that Greece represents. When you read the Oresteia and you hear Athena sort of explaining how the courtroom is going to work and how many jurors there are going to be and what kind of testimony is going to be admissible, and then I'm trained as a lawyer, and you realize 2,000 years later we're still doing things exactly the same way because it somehow it worked. It works. You realize just how much of the human experience is captured in a few of these iconic objects. And so for reasons that no one can really explain, I guess we could conjecture about it, but the Parthenon sculptures have come to be that embodiment. And there's no arguing about it. I mean, the things are what they are, and everybody knows it. Like I say, you don't need to explain to somebody why the Statue of Liberty represents American ideals of a melting pot society, of democratic ideals, of free travel, free speech, all of it. So I think we understood that's what we were dealing with in this case. It was an object of that magnitude, and I think the other side of it was we also felt very strongly that it was important to have British folks, to have people in the UK reflect on their own sense of national identity and how it had become intertwined with Greek identity, and for better or for worse. And I think Britain is in a little bit of an identity crisis, maybe at the moment. One of the slides that I showed yesterday was the front page of the Times, I think on January 2nd or 3rd, and it was the Prime Minister of the UK talking about, and the headline was that he aims to restore British pride. And I think that was sort of a shocking headline in some ways to me. I think that as bad as things are in the United States, and God knows there are a lot of problems in the United States at the moment, the president doesn't talk about the necessity for restoring American pride. I'm not sure how it is in Greece. I'm not Greek, but I would suggest that it's unlikely that the Greek prime minister would talk about the necessity for restoring Greek pride. I think most people do have pride in their history and their country, and so I think for us, it was also an opportunity to help folks here think, as everybody should, regardless of where you live, thoughtfully about what your national identity is, what your shared aspirations are, where the country's headed, what's important, and so forth. So I think we saw something in it for the British as well, because I think their relationship to Greek culture in particular in the 19th century, and then how that has played out over time, it's a huge part of the national identity, and understanding who you are, what you're about. It's always really important, and I think not having a constitution in England is an interesting thing. In the United States, we have these documents, and as silly as that sounds, to have the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution with its preamble that sets out, look, one of the first things every charity does is figure out what its mission statement is. And they put their mission statement up on their website. The United States has a mission statement. We put it up on our website. We put it on our money. I think it's important to figure out where you are at any given time and what it is you're trying to do as a country. And so I think to some degree we felt like this project might provide, as it has, an opportunity to reflect on what it means to be British, what it means to be a member of the community here, and what it is that this country is all about. So I think we saw something in it for everybody, and that was, I think, crucial to the process that we envisioned. Was we saw an adversarial process play out over 200 years, where it was Greece versus Britain. There's going to be a winner and a loser. Somebody's going to get the marbles. Somebody's going to lose the marbles. And we realized that it was never going to get solved that way, because nobody wants to be the loser. Everybody wants to be the winner. But if we could find a way to make this a situation where both sides would achieve something better than what they have already, then maybe there was hope. And so at a specific level, we realized that if we could provide the British Museum with objects that might do an even better job of teaching people about the aesthetics of antiquity than the current Parthenon sculptures, they'd come out better off than they were. And of course, for Greece, I mean, getting the objects back was what was important. When you look at the British Museum, they're ostensibly concerned about the art historical value of these objects. The Greeks are not necessarily concerned about the art historical value. It's the sentimental value. It's like my grandfather's watch. You don't care if the watch is accurate. You don't care if it's got a dent in the case. It was your grandfather's watch, and it's important to you because of that. And it's the same for the Parthenon sculptures to the Greeks. It's part of your national patrimony. It's an emotional attachment. But for the British Museum, ostensibly, it's all about teaching people. They're an educational institution. Teaching people about the art and aesthetics of antiquity. And if we could find a way through the use of duplicates to help the museum do that in a better way, then they're going to be better off as well. So we're trying to take a zero-sum game and turn it into a win-win scenario, and that's what we've accomplished.
Just on that point, what is your actual vision for what you're proposing to the British Museum? Are we talking about a complete set of reproductions of all of the items that they currently have within the museum to the point where they were at originally, or in their current state?
Well, I think our point of view is that there's a famous painting, 1818, 1819, showing Elgin himself sitting in the Duveen Gallery with the Parthenon sculptures arrayed around him. And you look at that painting and you realize nothing has changed in that room in 200 years. They haven't even dusted those things, I don't think. Well, the only thing that's changed is they've scraped them with steel brushes and they've poured hydrochloric acid on them. They've done a few things, but they've done nothing to improve the interpretation, to improve the context in which they're displayed. Absolutely nothing at all, at a time when there's all kinds of interesting technologies available to museums to enhance the visitor experience and to do a better job of teaching people about history. And so the British Museum currently is bringing people into the BM, showing people these objects in a state which in no way reflects how they looked when they came out of Phidias's studio. When they emerged from Phidias's studio, number one, they were all intact. All the fingers and toes and arms and legs were attached. But more important than that, they were brightly colored. And on top of that, they were also attached to a building. So it was the physical appearance, the context, etc. All of that is lost when people go to the Duveen Gallery. It'd be like, I don't know, if you're trying to teach people about the Italian Renaissance and you take them to a room with a bunch of Caravaggios and all the paint's missing on the paintings and the canvases are torn. No one learns anything about the Italian Renaissance that way. And I would put it to you that no one is learning anything meaningful about the aesthetics of 5th century BC Greece by looking at those objects, because they look nothing like the objects that Phidias produced. And as we know, unfortunately, they've been seized upon by ultranationalist organizations for over 100 years and used in horrific ways to foment myths about white culture in the West and who's responsible for the amazing art, literature, science, and technology of Western civilization. So it's not even like it's just not teaching people the truth about history. it's teaching people in a way that has been abused in horrific ways by pernicious organizations. So I think there's all kinds of reasons to think that what we're doing, and whether it's our project or somebody else's project, but that there are technical solutions to this. That there are things the British Museum could and should be doing to exploit technology in a way to allow them to do a better job of what they claim their function is. That is to educate people about history. And they're just not doing it now. And whether they choose our reconstructions, and we've offered to do various versions. We've offered to regress these things back to the state in which they existed when they were first carved. We've offered to restore the colors. We've offered to do all kinds of interesting things that I think will get people excited, but more important, give them a real sense of what these objects are all about. So I think, like I say, we obviously have a fractious relationship with the British Museum now for all the reasons that you know very well, all the guerrilla tactics and all of that. So maybe we burn too many bridges for it to be us. It's like go down Moses. Maybe we can lead them to the promised land, but we can't go down into the valley. So I think but we've shown them the way, and I think that one of the things that, look, as of January 28th, a year ago, nobody in England, the national dailies, nobody was talking about repatriation of these objects. And our project, just like the Palmyra Arch project, and I'm not trying to say cause and effect here, but what it did do was it put this into the front pages of these newspapers over and over and over again for the course of a year. January 28th, we announced this project with Ambassador Raptakis. 2 weeks later, on Valentine's Day, February 14th, the Times runs on page 3 a massive story about our project, great photos, great text, but then more important, the lead editorial that day was a specific endorsement of our project and also a specific statement from the Times, these things have to go back. And that's reversing 200 years of editorial policy at the national paper of record. So, and then from there it just went crazy. All the national dailies ran it. We're on the BBC World Service, and then papers all around the world, and then just radio, and then it all happened over again over the summer when the objects began to appear for the first time in the actual stone, and then again, of course, in November when Sir Simon Jenkins and I unveiled the first object, the Selene Horse, for public view in London. So this project has managed to keep this top of mind for a very long time. And I have to say, we've also worked behind the scenes. We've done our best to chat with the trustees that we know, to sound them out, to talk to them about why we think it's important to make this change now. And then, of course, we had the benefit of the zeitgeist. I mean, people are talking about the Benin bronzes, the Cambodian objects, all that's in the air. UNESCO in 2021 makes their decree that, look, these things have to go back. So a lot of things were coming together, and we're not trying to claim credit for, this is we're standing on the shoulders of giants here and on the shoulders of lots and lots of people whose names we don't even know. We came along at the right time, but what we did do was we got this into the public eye in a sustained kind of way so that people had to have these conversations. And I think that maybe the most important thing we did was to really challenge the BM, who for 200 years have been saying, we need these objects to teach people about history, and won't it be a shame if they go back to Greece, because then people won't have a chance to learn about history. And we said, wait a minute, you are not teaching people anything meaningful about history. If you're serious about teaching people about history, we'll show you how to do it, and you don't have to let us do it for you, but we'll show you how it can be done. And you can pick somebody that you like better, who doesn't bug you as much as we do, or whatever it is. But we'll show you the way, and we'll point out the extent to which that what you're saying about why you need these sculptures is bullshit. It's absolutely not true that they're doing anything meaningful to teach people about history with objects that don't look like the objects that were created in 5th century BC. It's just a fantasy recreation of something that never existed. And so I think that was that, by challenging them in that way, by showing them how technology can provide a solution, but also showing them how excited people can get about technology. I mean, imagine going into the British Museum and instead of seeing the same thing that Elgin saw in 1818, you see an amazing exhibition that allows you to regress these things, that shows them somehow in context through virtual reality or augmented reality. Suddenly they're back on so I think on the Parthenon, so I think we've shown them how excited people can get about technology. In addition to everything else. So I would say we provided a pretty strong template for success for them, and I think we've also done a great job of getting this in the public eye in a sustained kind of way so that people kind of have to pay attention. It's just not going away, and George Osborne desperately wants it to go away. He wants people to stop talking about this. He wants them to stop talking about Benin. He wants them to stop talking about Cambodian objects. And until these things go back, no one's going to stop talking about all of those things. So look, George Osborne is a very good man. He's a very smart man. He's a very savvy guy. You don't get to be chancellor here in the UK. You don't get to be editor of the Times here in the UK. I mean, he knows something, and he's done a great job, I think, of shepherding us through in a very short space of time, because he came out within a month of our announcing this project and said there is a deal to be done here. The day after our unveiling in London, he made a public statement, and he said, "Look, these things will go back to the communities from which they emerged hundreds of years ago." And so I think George gets it, and I think he's a very good guy. He's just the right guy for this. And when these things do go back, when I see the two of you in Athens at the big party we're going to have there, George will be there too. And if you see him, shake his hand, because he deserves as much credit as anybody in Greece or Australia or any place else for making this happen. He is a good guy, and he was the man. He was the man for this job.
Fantastic.
Well done. Well said.
We look forward to that day. But let's talk a little bit about the British Museum, because, as you say, fractious relationship with them at the moment. What are their intentions? Are their intentions pure? Why are they holding on to these objects so jealously?
What's the sticking point? Yeah.
Well, it's a hot potato. So what I'll say is this, then. There is one school of thought that says that 80% of Britons have said in the polls, send these things back. 2/3 of the members of Parliament have said, if called to a vote, we'll vote to send these things back. So query who it is that's saying, keep them here. And at some level, this could be just an extreme case of institutional lethargy, of institutional dysfunction. It really could be the fact that the British Museum, its job is to safeguard, protect, conserve objects. And so it's anathema to that culture to let things go, to give things back. And it might just be the case that this is not really a British problem, or, it's not a man in the street problem. It might just be a case of institutional lethargy. Their mission is to protect those objects. It's like Gringotts, in the goblins in Harry Potter. They got all that stuff in all those vaults, and their job is to protect it and keep it safe. So it could just be that mentality has produced a kind of inertia around this issue that is hard to break. And I think that's absolutely a part of it. We were told by a curator at the BM 2 summers ago. We were at an event, and she said that I think it was George's predecessor. It might have been two chairmans ago. When he arrived on the job, there was a memo on his desk, and it had one sentence on it that said, "Don't let go of the marbles. Don't lose the marbles. Don't lose the marbles." That's the kind of mentality, and it's, so I think that could be a big part of it. The British Museum also is understaffed. For whatever reason, they've allowed Jonathan Williams to become the spokesperson for the museum during this process. Mr. Williams is a wonderful scholar. He was the curator of coins at the museum for many, many years, but he's not a museum administrator in the strict sense. I mean, he's a scholar, and yet he was put into this role, and I'm not sure it was one that he had spent a lot of time preparing for, and as a result, the communications from the museum have not been good. I think being the public-facing person in a big institution like that is a tricky thing that requires a lot of experience. He was thrust into that role without the benefit of that experience, and I think it was very unfair for him to be pushed into that situation. But as a result, the museum has not done a good job communicating, and they've made a lot of mistakes along the way. So the British Museum has a lot to answer for here. But as you suggest in your question, it is deeply fascinating to think about why these objects have become so important to British life and culture. And it happened, more or less overnight in those early years of the 19th century. Because you got to understand, in the 18th century, Greek culture was viewed with a lot of suspicion because it was full of naked people and free love and lots of things that were not so appealing to the stuffy Regency era culture in Britain. I mean, it really was. It was very risque. I mean, this is not. I'm not trying. I'm not. No one's. Look, everyone loves Greek myths, but it was a little bit like, whoa, we're not quite sure we're ready. And then a guy, really almost single-handedly, a guy called Johann Winkelmann, who was maybe the most important art historian of the 19th century, wrote a couple of books on Greek culture, really recast it in the form in which it exists, I think, in people's minds today as a culture of asceticism, of athleticism, of discipline. And that image of Greek culture suddenly became very appealing to British culture in the early years of the 19th century, and took a strong foothold. And I think what was happening at that time was that Great Britain didn't exist before 1800. There was no Britain before 1800. The Act of Union is 1800, the same year by coincidence that Elgin went to Athens. I don't know if there was cause and effect there, but and their flag, the Union Jack, 1800. I mean, you got to understand, America had already been around for a generation before there was a Britain. The Stars and Stripes had been around for a generation before there was a Union Jack. So Britain had a lot of catching up to do in those early years of the 19th century. And on top of that, even apart from the legal technicalities of when the country became a country officially, you got to remember that Italian culture, Greek culture, far more ancient than British culture. I mean, the literary tradition in England started, let's call it 700 or so. That was 2,000 years after Aeschylus wrote the Oresteia. So that this is England is quite a newfangled culture. There wasn't a king who called himself the King of England until Athelstan around the year 1000. So I mean, this is a kind of they call America the New World. I mean, in a way, England's the New World. We're just the newer world. And I think there was a sense that there was a historical void that needed to be filled there, because England, look, in 1800, nobody was bigger, more powerful, more successful, richer than England was globally, and yet they didn't have the one thing they really wanted, which was this pedigree to kind of back it up. And Greece, I think, was a great candidate for providing the kind of national identity, national history that they were looking for at that time. Mm-hmm. And we did it in the U.S. too. Look, there's a reason why Washington, D.C. looks like Athens, because we wanted to connect ourselves to the democracy of Greece. And so this is not a knock on the British. Everybody did it. The British went whole hog in a way that other people didn't. Buildings, architecture. George's crown had Greek motifs on it. Clothing, it was pottery. It was knives and forks. Everything had Greek motifs. I was over at one of the gentlemen's clubs in London on Tuesday night, the Boodles, and I was in this room, and I looked around, and it was almost like a joke. This is high Regency, so it's early sort of 1830s, 1840s, every nook and cranny of that room had a Greek motif on it. They had managed to stuff as much of Greece as they possibly could into the furniture, into the fireplace, into the moldings, into the rug, everything. It was incredible. And you realize that there really was a fervor with which Greek culture was absorbed in those years that it's hard to imagine to this day, but it continues to this day. So much so that when Boris Johnson, a great friend of our projects, is on the way out the door, he's invoking Cincinnatus. Yesterday I showed a picture during my talk at SOAS of him wearing a toga in 2020 at a public event. I mean, this is, Boris, like I say, we were at Oxford at the same time. I think he's been a great friend to heritage. People can argue about his politics, obviously, but the fact is, here you have a guy who's himself a classicist, trained by the great Jasper Griffin, and sees Greek culture as still an integral part of British culture in 2022. So it is a fascinating thing, and I think you could write several very interesting books on on the relationship between Greek culture and British culture. But the fact is, it happened, that adoption, absorption of Greek culture in the early 19th century happened, and it became an obsession, and it's certainly inextricably bound up with why the Elgin Marbles are still here to this day, because I think Britain sees something about Greece as being integral to their own culture. And so one of the goals of our project has been to remind British folks that it was not always thus, that this was really like received pronunciation. British people didn't always talk the way they talk now. This was a creation of the 19th century. It's not integral to your society. It's not integral to your civilization and your culture. And you'll be okay on your own without the trappings of ancient Greece to remind you about this chapter in your history.
I feel like you need a standing ovation for everything you just said.
I feel like I need to toast you or something. That was brilliant, Roger.
Fantastic. Wow. Fantastic stuff.
Yeah,
what do you think of that?
Oh, just trying to digest it all. That's fascinating.
There's a lot to digest, and there's a lot you can say as well, because, talk about the influence of Greek heritage and culture on the British. I mean, how many statues are there to Lord Byron in Greece, for example? And so many amazing philhellenes from the UK to Greece as well. Modern ones as well, such as Stephen Fry and all these guys. It's so inextricably linked.
Yeah. So, Roger, just a quick one.
King Charles, his great-grandfather was King George I of Greece.
Exactly.
Byron, and the other thing is, look, you got to give the British credit. I mean, the British were instrumental. Without the British, the Ottoman Turks would not have been kicked out of Athens. And Byron himself, put his entire fortune into that war. And I think he would have been. The deal was he would have been king of Greece had they won. That was the bargain. And who knows if it would have been honored. But these two countries are absolutely connected in fundamental kinds of ways. And also, I think that the truth is that. That England has done interesting things with the symbols of Greek heritage. I mean, you look at Wedgwood. You look at Chippendale. You look at the architects who created the wonderful buildings. And the Greek revival. It really was an extraordinary artistic and cultural movement. So they did good things with what they borrowed from Greece. But it's just important to remember that they did borrow them from Greece. They're not fundamental to British culture. They didn't exist as a part of British culture before 1800. There's a lot of culture that existed before then. I mean, my God, Henry VIII, Shakespeare. I mean, Britain's got it all. So it's important to remember that these things are not a necessary part, and we're not always a part of British self-identity, British national identity, and that Britain will be just fine with these sculptures down the road in Athens. I mean, sometimes you get the sense that we're talking about dumping these things into a pit and burying them. I mean, we're talking about moving them to a different museum, which is accessible by train and by bus and by airplane, really easily for people throughout Europe. So. I think there's just it's a great opportunity, like I say, for Greece to get back their national treasures, but it's also a great opportunity for Britain to reflect on where they want to be. I mean, look, the British Museum should have a lot more British in it. People visit the British Museum and say, that was not a British museum. That was like, and maybe that's what they want, I guess, at some level. But it's a shame that there isn't more British stuff in the British Museum. The Smithsonian's full of American stuff. And I think Americans go there and feel quite proud about who they are. And the whole story of America is there. You can see the founding documents straight through to the lunar module. Man goes to the moon. Americans are proud that there was an American flag on the moon, as anybody would be. So I think it'd be great to get something British in the British Museum. And I think, one of the things that we've announced just very recently is that we are commissioning what we're calling for the moment, we'll probably come up with a better name, the Millennium Frieze, 1,000 years of British history, the same dimensions, the same format, the same general stylistic approach as the Parthenon frieze, but instead of being filled with the story of the history of ancient Greece, to fill it with the story of 1,000 years of British history, from Ethelstan right through to the 20th century. And we've got some really interesting artists on tap who are going to be helping with the project. But I think it could become a great source of British national pride. And look, like I say, you go to the Smithsonian, you see the Spirit of St. Louis up there hanging in the ceiling at the Smithsonian. You think, wow, that's pretty cool. The fact is that a Briton, Mr. Alcock, preceded Lindbergh by, 15, 16 years as the first guy to, in fact, fly across the Atlantic. He's not even remembered to this day. I mean, it's extraordinary, but the first transatlantic pilot was Sir John Alcock, and everybody remembers Lindbergh, nobody remembers Alcock, and he'd be a great addition to the British Museum, because that's something to really be proud of. So, this is I think it's going to be an interesting adjunct to the project, not only talking about finding ways to help Britain let go of the Parthenon sculptures and what might replace them specifically in the British Museum, but how the focus might be shifted a little bit to focus a little more on this extraordinary country, Britain, in which the museum sits. And so we're gonna help them think about creative ways to do that.
Just think about the types of things you could put into something like that.
Definitely,
you'd have to have the Beatles. You'd have to have David Beckham's left foot. You'd have to have all that sort of stuff.
Classic. Look, I don't know how they'd even argue with that, Roger. You've covered all points.
Alexy had a chance to make a nice. Alexy and David Beckham made a really wonderful joint presentation over the summer. Was it over the summer, Alexy? When was it? I forget now.
Yeah, July.
She and David shared the stage here in London to talk about another great chapter in British history, the North Greenland expedition of 1953. Again, like Sir John Alcott, completely forgotten, but it was the first. I mean, and Alexy, you're the specialist here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the first major scientific expedition dedicated to studying climate change, which of course now crucially important. And
Wow.
Again, it's something that. I think Britons tend to be modest people, and that's a great quality to have. It's one that I could learn from myself. I could be a lot more modest than I am, but I think unfortunately sometimes that modesty results in people forgetting about achievements. And I think that one of the things that we're looking to do is get maybe Britain a little focused more on blowing their own horn a little bit.
Wow.
I think that's a great thing to talk
Well
about.
said. It is. Look, I guess, saying all that, the marbles still aren't in Greece. What is the sticking point? I understand that if they go through Parliament, you're saying the Parliament would vote for them. The 80% of the people are saying to send them back. What is the sticking point now? Is it just technicality now? Is it over the loan, or it's not a loan?
My take on this, and this is completely I think Ambassador Raptakis. I was saying what a great selection George Osborne was for the job that he has, and also specifically for his role in this negotiation. Ambassador Raptakis, what an amazing guy. It's been such a pleasure to work with him. He's given us some amazing advice over the course of the past year. He's just, he exudes confidence, competence, everything you want in a diplomat. I think that the obviously one issue has been this question of the like it is in any agreement, the exact words that are used. So the word loan implies ownership on behalf of the British, and I think it's silly to talk about ownership of heritage objects generally. It's especially silly to talk about ownership of these objects, since it's impossible at this stage to sort of talk about the legal technicality of ownership. It doesn't really matter, I don't think. Who owns the stone? I mean, who owns the culture and the heritage they represent? That's what's important. So I think they've managed to hit on some agreed language. I'm told that the word deposit has been suggested as a way of avoiding the word loan, that the objects would not be loaned to Greece but would be deposited in Greece, which I think is a great diplomatic word for something that keeps all the crucial elements vague but keeps the important elements quite specific. I think also, frankly, the political situation has just been so darn crazy over the last year. We've had 3 prime ministers in the UK in 2022. The Greek prime minister has had, some rough spots with the wiretapping allegations and so forth. I think that was a difficult time. So I think that's obviously factored into all of this. My own take on it is that I think originally some people thought that with the Greek elections coming up quite quickly, that perhaps the Greek prime minister might be able to get a boost from being the guy who brings the marbles home. And of course, that's as it should be. And I think now that we're getting down to the final stages where people are going to have to actually produce an agreement, going to have to produce a timetable. Everybody understands that nothing is ever going to be perfect. And I think perhaps the political calculus on the Greek side at the moment might be that things are actually going pretty well. The BM is saying very positive things. The Greeks are saying very positive things. Things are pretty good at the moment. The polling, I think, in Greece is very favorable to the current prime minister. Let's not upset the apple cart by bringing these things home at the moment in a way that maybe some people will disagree with. Maybe we won't get everything at once. Maybe some language in the agreement will be problematic in some way. So I think the current thinking might be to preserve the status quo for the moment until the election is behind in Greece and has happened in Greece, and then shortly after the election see things start to flow into Greece under terms to be finally determined over the next few weeks. What I'll say is, talk about good timing. I mean, the reality is that the British Museum is going to have to be cleared out very soon, and that portion specifically of the British Museum is going to have to be cleared out very soon for the very much needed renovations and remodeling of the museum. It's I'm told, a $2 billion project. And so this obviously it comes at a very good time because, I don't think Mr. Osborne or anybody at the BM wants to be responsible for storing those objects, for putting them. This is not the time. what a great solution to send them back to Greece, to clear that space, to clear this dispute, to move everything forward in a way that's quite positive. We've heard lots of talk, and I'm sure you have as well, about the kinds of objects that might come to the British Museum to replace the Parthenon sculptures, because obviously the British Museum still wants to have amazing objects that get people excited about the history of ancient Greece. And the Agamemnon mask has been discussed. Lots of important and marquee objects have been discussed. So I think, again, just like with the technology, which provides so many exciting opportunities to really enliven this place. And if you're going to spend $2 billion remodeling it, you better not walk into the same old, same old. You spend $2 billion on your kitchen, you better not come back and find the same stove you had before the remodel. So I think this is all part of the kind of excitement that they could build into this rehabilitation of the museum. Not just amazing new technology, but also some amazing new objects from the Greek side. I mean, just to show how bad things are, we bumped into a curator at the BM a while back, and she's one of her objects, so-called, is the Rosetta Stone, and she was lamenting the fact that the Rosetta Stone had never been co-displayed with something called the Philae Obelisk, which is at a country house outside of London, and it was these two objects together. No one remembers this, but it was these two objects together that resulted in the translation of cuneiform. And yet the Rosetta Stone gets all the attention because it's in London, and the Philae Obelisk is sitting in some guy's garden in Kingston Lacy. We did a very long imaging project on it was several months long imaging project on the Philae Obelisk. Have all kinds of great imaging data, and I said, something? She said, I'd love to get these two objects together to show people, their relationship. But, it's just never going to happen because the British Museum's never going to let the Rosetta Stone travel, and the Philae Obelisk is too big to bring to the British Museum. I said, well, that's easy. We've got this great imagery. I'll make you a virtual Philae Obelisk, and then I'll geotag it the way they did those Pokemons a few years ago. I'll geotag it to the floor next to the Rosetta Stone, so when people come to the British Museum, and only when they come to the British Museum, can they pull out their smartphones, put on their $1 Google Cardboard goggles, and see the Philae Obelisk in excruciating detail, lifelike detail, sitting on the floor, miniaturized to some degree so it can fit into the room, but nonetheless there, right next to the Rosetta Stone. She said, that would take 2 years for the British Museum, if they ever approved it, to approve it. And I said, well, you know what? Wow. Let's not wait. I'll do that, and we'll see what happens. So one of the projects that we unfortunately didn't get a chance to do in 2022, but will get a chance to do in 2023, is to bring the Philae Obelisk into the British Museum. And I think it's going to be fascinating, because will the British Museum say that, you're trespassing virtually on our museum property by putting a virtual object into the gallery? And it'll be really fascinating to see what their reaction is. But what I'm also curious about is what will the public reaction be to the first ever conjunction of these two objects, and will the British Museum be able to see through whatever it is, their ego, whatever it is, enough to say, hey, this is a really cool technology, we should have done this ourselves? Because you got to understand, with their resources, this is the kind of thing, even with our far more meager resources, in a matter of weeks or a couple of months, we could throw this together in a very credible and high quality sort of way. The British Museum could do just the same, maybe in half the time. And why haven't they done it? Why do you have a curator saying she's been waiting her whole career to do this? I say, here's how you do it. Oh, it's never going to happen. That's just depressing that a national museum would be in that situation. So I think I think that in terms of what's going to happen with the British Museum and these objects, it'll be very cool to see the British Museum reopen, and to reopen that Duveen Gallery in a way that really reflects the kind of relationship Greece and England should have, given the relationship between Charles and the royal family of Greece, and the history of the two countries. I mean, World War I, World War II, NATO. I mean, these countries are close allies. This should not be a divisive storyline for them. So I'm really excited to see the British Museum reopen in a way that reflects the best of technology, the best of national social policy, and the best of presenting history in a way the public will get excited about and enjoy.
Your points there are particularly about augmented reality. I mean, these things are really accessible nowadays. Even in some of the work that we've done, you can turn over an augmented reality project within a couple of weeks, and it comes out fantastic. It's so accessible, and I think the accessibility part is what makes your guys' story so interesting as well. Because, I mean, we've buried the lead a little bit. We're an hour into this, but let's talk a little bit about what you guys actually did. You guys petitioned the British Museum to be able to scan the Parthenon marbles. They didn't allow you to do that officially, but you did it anyway, and partially, but by all accounts and based on the reports that we've read, partially because the technology is so good that you could just do it off your smartphone anyway. So I want to understand the story behind it, though, because in my mind, it's you guys sitting in the back of a pub going, okay, we're going to get these bastards. They think they're so smart. We're just going to whip our phones out, kind of thing. You know what I mean? What's the story behind it?
Alexy, do you want to tell the story?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we tried to be collaborative, but they were not so keen to do that. So yeah, I mean, the technology, it is a bit more. So there's a little bit more to it, sadly, I guess, than just kind of going in and doing the whole thing on an iPad. So the kind of really high quality modelling that we've done, using the data that we were able to access, is quite fiddly, tricky, specialist. So yeah, I mean, anyone can go in with an iPad, and actually, as I said earlier, the software that you can get now on a smartphone or on an iPad for 3D rendering is really, really impressive. And even in the last, if I think about the technology that was available when we were doing the Palmyra Arch project versus the technology that's now available, those are worlds apart. But even so, you will find that you can only get a really rough kind of representation of an object of that kind of scale using that kind of kit. But what you can do is you can get a kind of outline 3D view, and then you can easily, using these handheld devices, get really high quality photographs. So what we did was we went in using our visitor guidance approved technology. So the BM visitor guidelines allow you to take 3D scanners, actually, which is not what we did. We just took iPads. So the iPad Pro has a LiDAR capability just native on the machine. So we took iPads and iPhones, and we took some basic scans from the museum floor, and we took an awful lot of photographs. And so the BM allows you to go in with 3D scanners and any kind of kit you might like, so long as it is not, so long as it's handheld and not tripod mounted. So in we went. We spent a lot of time there. I know that gallery quite well now, and we took many thousands of photographs. And we also took, as I say, kind of outline scans using iPhones, and then we went away and spent a very long time piecing all of that together. The job would have been much easier had the BM actually allowed us to do what we asked to do, which is just to take some high-end scanning equipment in and scan the objects, using that technology kind of common sense approach. But I must say, I think we had a lot more fun doing it the way that we eventually did it.
Like James Bond.
And if their goal had been to to keep all this low key, needless to say, it might have been a better idea just to let us do it, because the newspapers have loved this idea. Everybody's talking about us and our so-called guerrilla tactics.
So funny.
But no, so it was. I'm quite happy to accept that to kind of to go along with the guerrilla idea, but it need not have been like that.
So were you the mastermind, Alexy?
Well, I mean, to some extent, yeah. I was the gal with the iPad. So I should have no balaclava, unfortunately. I think I talked to some people about this, and having read the papers, they kind of ask you questions in a low whisper.
Yeah.
Well, were you? And I'm imagining the kind of cat suit, the balaclava, and the iPad covered in stealth paint or something. But sadly, no. It was the iPad was purchased from Curry's, I think, and
you didn't drop out of the ceiling. There was nothing like that.
No, not sadly not. But no, so yeah, it was at some level as simple as that. But It's not so easy producing these, a really high-res model using that kind of kit. So it took us a while to piece all of that together.
Did you need to do a 360-degree imagery of the Selene Horse? And if so, how did you?
Yeah, I mean, basically, you need. Yeah, so the Selene Horse is on a pedestal in the museum. So it's sitting. In fact, somewhere here I've got a nice little 3D model of it. But this was a good candidate for our first object, and of course it's an iconic object, which probably trumps everything else. But it is actually possible with a little bit of stretching to access. You can take a picture of every single piece of the surface of that object, which is essential because otherwise, you would have to interpolate. So you're even able, because of the height, to get in and take photographs of the top of the horse. There's actually quite a lot of detail along the mane. So there are these little, I think speculation is that there would have been little feathers that were, or sort of plumes that were inserted in the original.
Oh, wow.
So the mane of the horse is a classic kind of Greek sticky up kind of mane on the back of the horse, and then there are these little drilled holes along the back. So yeah, basically we were able to take pictures of every piece of it. Had we not been able to do that, it would have been a tricky.
I mean, what a lot of the papers have emphasized the simplicity of the technology that was used, and what never gets reported is the technology may have been relatively simple, but we had Dr. Karenowska using the technology. I mean, Babe Ruth used the same hickory baseball bat as everybody else who ever swung a bat in the major leagues, but he hit lots of home runs with that bat. And the fact is that while the technology we were forced to use because of the British Museum's policy was perhaps simpler than we would have chosen, there are a few people in the UK today that have the same broad skill set that Dr. Karenowska has when it comes to imaging, producing 3D models of these kinds of objects. So that's the part that doesn't get reported, and it's why the Selene Horse came out the way that it did. And I have to say, it was extremely gratifying because we were nervous. Of course, here we had set ourselves up as producing a perfect replica of the Selene Horse, and we have not seen, and knock on wood, a single news report, comment from anybody, including in the Twitter sphere, suggesting that our copy is anything less than perfect, and it really is down to Dr. Karenowska's expertise. So yeah, that is the part that never gets reported.
Well, the truth is we've got a really good team, and we have a lot of skilled people, and also a lot of people who are really. This was a project that required, an extraordinarily high level of kind of attention to detail, and we just got a group of people who are really, who were really excited about it and who have worked exceptionally hard, over every kind of millimeter of the surface of that object to get it just right. It's been a great adventure, and it's also just been a really nice sort of way to bring those people together on a project that has such a fantastic kind of outcome. At the end of the day, you get this beautiful marble horse at the end. So it's been very satisfying.
Well, using that Pentelic Marble was I think a huge part of that, because we produced an initial copy in Carrara marble, which was very, very beautiful. But the Pentelic Marble just has this magic to it that made all the difference. And the story of how we got that story. That's such a great part of the story.
That was my question. How did you get the Pentelic Marble? That was what I was going to ask.
Well, we've spoken to a marble importer here about getting Pentelic Marble in Australia, and he's just like, "How much money you got, mate? There's no chance."
It's quite challenging.
So, so look, we from the get-go, this was the plan. It was the plan we announced with Ambassador Raptakis at Keith's house a year ago. So everybody understood that was kind of part of the idea, or a fundamental part of the idea here. I guess I shouldn't probably say too much about it, except to say that everybody on the Greek side understood that was of the essence of the deal here, and they just made it happen, and it really was. It was a fascinating. There was absolutely some cloak and dagger to it. I mean, we got text messages from numbers we didn't know exactly who that was on the other end of the line. We got phone calls from folks that we didn't exactly know who we were talking to. But basically, at some point, after having sort of clarified this is what we need, we got a guy on the phone, said, look, how much do you need? Tell us exactly the dimensions, et cetera, et cetera. And lo and behold, it gets put onto a truck in Athens and headed through Albania to us in Carrara, and arrived. Alexy, I guess I shouldn't say too much about the shipping, but suffice it to say, it was all fast. Someday, I guess, when the statute of limitations runs, we can tell all the details. But what I will say is, we'll be forever indebted to our friends in Greece and our supporters in Greece. And none of this, all of this happened in a completely legitimate way. It's just that, I think there's a certain element of secrecy around even perfectly legitimate goings on. But there certainly were. We were certainly very, very grateful to the folks that made this happen. And frankly, I think everybody agreed that it was a perfectly appropriate use of Pentelic marble. Obviously, the deal is that the Greek government, I think, owns all the Pentelic marble, and that it's only used for restoration or for other projects that are intimately connected with conserving the Parthenon and related pieces of art. And I think our project was, although not happening in Greece, and I guess that kind of made it unique in terms of Pentelic marble being supplied for a project that was going to be happening outside of Greece, nonetheless, it was exactly of a piece with every other instance in which Pentelic marble is being used, i.e. to preserve, conserve, and promote the memory of the history of the Parthenon and all of its beautiful decorations. So I think it was absolutely a legitimate use of Pentelic marble. It's one that we've been very respectful of the marble, and we've tried. We certainly gave it our best. There's no question that what we produced, I think, is as high quality as anyone could ever possibly produce. And so we feel like we've done our Greek supporters proud, and we feel like we've done the marble itself proud. I mean, it's amazing to think that you look at the Selene Horse in the British Museum, and you look at our horse, and the stone from which they're made, they were sitting side by side, right next to each other in that mountain in Athens, and it's a chilling kind of thing. But I think the reason it's important is because I think one of the things that people think about when they think about copies is this question of aura and authenticity. And it's a point that comes up over and over again. How can a copy possibly approach those metaphysical qualities of an original object? And this is a classic example. I mean, the arch was another classic example. We had Syrians tell us over and over again that our arch meant as much to them in different kinds of ways as the original arch had meant to them, because our arch, although it was made in the 2000, how many years later, Alexy? 1400 years later, it was nonetheless the product of people living in countries very far away, not connected with Syria, caring enough about what was happening in Syria to want to make a difference. And then the arch appearing at all of these iconic venues, New York City, Trafalgar Square, the U.S. Congress, G7. It did change public policy, government policy. It became a monument in its own right with its own story to tell. It's I think probably now been seen by more people alive today than saw the original arch, and certainly through the magic of media and the internet, absolutely true. So I think these copies can take on a life of their own and become monuments in their own right and have their own importance. And certainly the arch now, I think, has a very special kind of importance. I mean, to be in Arona, Italy, with the sons of Khaled al-Assad, who was murdered by ISIS for refusing to surrender the art objects of Palmyra, to have his sons cut the ribbon. I mean, that object, it's its own monument now. And I think the Elgin marbles that we're recreating, the Selene Horse, it's now part of this incredible story of how a 200-year diplomatic dispute between two friendly countries potentially got resolved. I mean, that Selene Horse, will have, for many people alive today, maybe a more interesting and compelling story to tell than the original Selene Horse, because the original Selene Horse that's a great symbol of Greek history and tradition, never going to be eclipsed by anything for the people of Greece, but maybe for people in the UK or elsewhere who think about heritage assets and how we relate to them. The story of the Selene Horse that we created could become a significant object. Certainly, it is an important part of the story, no matter what happens. So, I think that this and the use of Pentelic marble here is absolutely essential to that, because I think to the extent that there is something magic in the molecules of stone, forget about the aura and the metaphysics, but it's important that it have that it came from that same mountain, that it came from that same source. That does give it a kind of, I don't know, credibility that it would certainly lack without that. But it also is part of the story, and the story of how we got that Pentelic marble, and the people who trusted us enough to give us that precious stone. That's all part of the story now. And so I think it really is a crucial part of all of this.
It's absolutely an amazing story, and what an incredible piece to end up with as well. Have you seen it, Nick?
I have on screen, obviously, but where is it now? The one that you guys have created, is it in London or is it in Athens?
So it's still at the Freud Museum, and we decided to unveil this at the Freud Museum for a few reasons. One is because it's a central London venue. It's an amazing space, but also, and I guess more important, couple of things. One is Freud was absolutely himself obsessed with Greek history, Greek art, Greek mythology. His house in London, where the Selene Horse resides today, is absolutely filled from top to bottom with his own collection of ancient Greek artifacts. So the Selene Horse has lots of friends to chat with at night when they turn off the lights. But even more important, Freud was the progenitor of this idea of object relations theory, the idea that we build relationships with physical objects in a very special way, especially these iconic objects, whether they're religious objects or whether they're heritage assets, that we build these very important bonds with these objects. But it's always important to remember, when you think about that relationship, that it's not coming from the stone. Like the Pentelic marble, as beautiful it is, it's not sending out any special waves into the universe. When you look at the Selene Horse, whether it's the original or the copy or whatever it is, and you get a tingle in your spine, you think about the 2,500 years of history that have elapsed between then and now, and all the ways in which Greek culture has influenced the culture we're immersed in today. That's coming from your brain. That all of that tingle. It's not coming from the stone. It's coming from you. And I think that was a really important point that we wanted people to think about when they looked at the copy of the Selene Horse. I think, look, the Xerox machine has made people think that copies are somehow second class. Anybody who goes to the Metropolitan Museum or the British Museum and sees all of those beautiful Roman statues, all of which, or most of which, are copies of Greek statues, no one looks at them and says that's second-rate art. People love the sculptures of ancient Rome, but somehow copies have gotten a bad name. And like I say, I think it was the Xerox machine that did it. But we wanted people to think about the art of the copy and what it means, and more important, I guess, where do you draw the line? Where does the heritage component of a heritage object reside? Is it in the object itself? Is there some magic in the object, or is the magic inside your brain and your knowledge of the history that connects you to that object?
Just on that point, what is the true value of something like a copy of the Selene Horse made of Pentelic marble? I mean, you talk about how much a block of Pentelic marble might potentially cost, but put in the level of the level of work that needs to go into it. I mean, this also has a story behind it as well. How do you put a price on something like that?
Well, of course, we never would, and you know, we have to think long and hard about where we want this to end up. Now, obviously, our first choice would be to have it end up in the British Museum, and I can tell you right now, I'd be very pleased to donate this object to the British Museum, free and clear. Take the Palmyra Arch. We've already publicly committed ourselves to donating the Palmyra Arch to the Palmyra Museum once it's safe for the object to return there, once the site is under the control of the Syrians and safe. We're going to donate it to the museum in honor of Professor Al-Assad. So I think it is interesting to think about where these things end up. But in terms of putting a value on it, I mean, you just couldn't do it. At this point, it's become such a like you say, I mean, even just as an art object, given the craftsmanship, given the fact that it's made of Pentelic marble, probably the only time Pentelic marble that I'm aware was used outside of Greece for anything like this. Impossible to put a dollar value on it, but I think beyond that, it's just the what it's come to represent in terms of this incredible story. I mean, look, the New York Times. I mentioned the couple thousand words they wrote about us in the Science Times over the summer. Just 4 or 5 days ago, they had a front page story on this again. I mean, the Washington Post did a full page on our project. I mean, so I think this thing has taken on a life of its own. So obviously, it has. It would have broad appeal, but from our perspective, it belongs in the British Museum side by side with whatever it is they decide to put in the new Duveen Gallery after the grand reopening, because I think it's absolutely will be part of the story. I mean, again, very hard to decide where cause and effect lies, but there is no question that you look at the timeline. January 28th, we make this announcement. 2 weeks later, the Times runs its editorial endorsing the project, indicating their editorial belief that these sculptures have to go home, and then everything that happened afterwards. It was clearly an inflection point in the 200-year history. So it will always be an important object in this very important and fascinating story.
Wow! Did you end up painting it as well?
So the painted version will be the Carrara marble version that we produce, okay, because the surface will not matter so much, obviously, once it's painted. The original plan called for us to produce a painted version by now, and I have to say that we've decided to hold off on that. Until the everything gets resolved. The temperature was pretty high. There's a lot of debate about how best to present painted surfaces. The Metropolitan Museum in New York also decided, for whatever reason, to run a major exhibition in 2022 around this very topic. So they stole our thunder a little bit with respect to that, and did obviously with their resources, did an infinitely better job than we ever could have done with this issue. But also, I think we kind of wanted to keep our message. We understood that our role in this was a public messaging role, and I think public messages are best when they're kind of clear and simple and to the point. And we didn't want to start doing things that would muddy the waters, just for the sake of getting an extra couple of stories in the news cycle or something. So we decided to keep it simple, but as soon as this gets, it is primed, literally primed and ready to go, and that will be an important next step in the project once the sculptures start heading back to Greece.
Wow, well, I've got a quick question for Alexy, actually. The ancient seven wonders of the world. Do you think you can start to look at creating something like that, like the statue of Zeus at Olympia or the Colossus of Rhodes? It sounds like this is endless now. You could recreate anything from the sounds of the technology that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, the limits are only your imagination at this stage. I mean, I think that certainly the digital tools have now become so sophisticated that you can produce essentially a perfect digital model of anything you like, as long as you're willing to invest enough time. That's really it's interesting that, even now, with the technology having moved on, as quickly as it has, the limiting factor time tends to be man hours. So it's the kind of manual human interventions that limit the use of this technology. And that's one of the reasons why, we were talking about why you don't see more sort of AR, VR in museums. It's because high quality AR and VR is still quite expensive in that sector, because it requires skilled people to work for, in many cases, a long time. But as long as you're willing to kind of buy into that, essentially you can produce a copy of of any object you like, or a representation of something that maybe has never been seen, or has long since not existed. So I think that there is a lot of scope here to use our imaginations to explore this kind of interesting interface between the history that we know, the history that we can speculate about, and the science that we have at our disposal.
What would be your front runner for a project?
It's impossible to say. I mean, I think that the thing is, these projects really get their legs and their excitement and their purpose out of the underlying sort of social purpose behind them. So, the world is full of beautiful objects. For me, it was a big privilege to be able to reproduce the Selene Horse, because that is an object that for years, I've admired, and it would have been to some extent high on my personal list, just as a sort of as a selfish project anyway. So that was great. But, the reality is that without some kind of overarching purpose, without fitting into some kind of interesting jigsaw, and without having meaning to individuals, it's hard really to kind of rank objects according to, which one you might like to make next. So, you know, I can imagine some objects are important because they're spectacular and they're, you know, they're massive and awe-inspiring. But, you know, sometimes smaller and less sort of dramatic appearing objects can be more important and more exciting just because of the communities that they're attached to.
So you're not in a hurry to recreate a Fabergé egg, for example?
No, well, I think not right now.
Not yet.
But, no disrespect to Mr. Fabergé.
When you mention some of these
Fantastic.
monumental objects like the Colossus at Rhodes and so forth, I have to say that there are interesting possibilities here in the virtual realm, and I think, you know, people increasingly are not just willing to accept virtual replacements for physical objects. I think they, in many cases, prefer the virtual to the original. People live in their phones now; they live on the internet. I mean, people are very accepting of digital of accessing the world through digital interfaces, and we've actually got something sort of interesting that's happening, I think, next month. We'll sort of see how the next month goes, but certainly over the next 60 days. In addition to our guerrilla scans of the Parthenon sculptures, we also made a guerrilla scan of the Duveen Gallery. So we are now in possession of our own virtual Duveen Gallery, accurate down to the chewing gum on the floor and the litter and the trash cans. I mean, every square inch of this thing has now been imaged and now been, through the magic of Alexy and her team, been converted into a virtual experience of the Duveen Gallery. But we took everything out of it. So now we have an empty Duveen Gallery that we can populate with our own objects. One of the objects that will go in there early on will be the Millennium Frieze that I described. We may also, just to see how they look in the Duveen Gallery, bring in some of those amazing objects that the Greek government has suggested that might be willing to loan if Britain plays along and returns the Parthenon sculptures. But in any event, we can put whatever we want into our Duveen Gallery. And some of these monumental, I mentioned, for example, the Philae obelisk and how amazing it would be to bring that into the British Museum and show it side by side with the Rosetta Stone. To allow people to appreciate it, it would have to be reduced to a more human scale. And some of these colossal objects that you mentioned could be, given the same treatment, could be produced at hugely monumental scale, you know, many stories high, or as high as the Duveen Gallery is in any event, but scaled to fit within the Duveen Gallery. So I think we could preserve the impact, the majesty of some of these enormous objects, but put them into these buildings, or these virtual buildings, where they'll fit and where people can experience them. So I think that's a really interesting idea, and I think, again, a great example. I mean, look, can you imagine get people into the Duveen Gallery, geotag our virtual Duveen Gallery to the actual Duveen Gallery. So when you see a door in the virtual in the VR goggles, and you push it with your hand, the door is actually there. When you crumple up the wrapper from your sandwich and you see the trash can in the goggles and you throw it into the trash can is actually there. So it's a very powerful thing when you overlay a virtual experience onto the actual physical surroundings that are there that you can feel.
Wow.
If you see a bench in the virtual goggles, unlike ordinary virtual reality experiences, if it's geotagged to the actual Duveen Gallery and you see a bench in the goggles, you can sit down on that bench. It's really there. But the art that you see is different art, and it's a fascinating idea, I think, and one that has not really been explored very much. But you're exactly right. Once you accept the fact that you can have this kind of immersive experience, there's no reason why the Colossus at Rhodes couldn't be recreated. And look, we need to work with folks to figure out what's a credible way of doing that, because we don't want to Disneyfy things. We want to do things in a way that's meaningful, that's scholarly, that's evidence-based, etc. But I think we can and should do those things. And there are folks out there who could provide us with the kind of scholarship we need to do a credible job of those kinds of things. And maybe there are some things that we couldn't do that way. We'll leave it to somebody. Maybe that's part of the entertainment industry. There's a line between what should happen in museums and in universities and what happens in the entertainment world. And God bless the folks in the entertainment world. Some of those, Raiders of the Lost Ark, that's all part of the zeitgeist too. Not for Indiana Jones would people care as much about archaeology. Barely a day goes by when CNN doesn't have an archaeology story on the website somewhere. And I think Indiana Jones played a role in that. So I think, God bless the entertainment folks, but I think what we like to do is a little bit different, and if we can do it in an academically credible way, we would love to do it. And you're exactly right. You should want to see those things. Everybody wants to see those things, and we would love to find a credible way to bring them to you.
We're talking about a very different type of museum now.
And this is exactly the museum we should be talking about. I mean, how can it be, again, I hate to harp on it, but how can it be that nothing has changed in that room since the time that Elgin was alive? I mean, you go in there, they've got little 3x5 cards that purport to explain, what these objects are. I mean, these objects are some of the most iconic. I mean, you could have an electronic screen that scrolled through 30 pages, and you wouldn't run out of material to explain the importance and relevance of the Parthenon sculptures to a visitor. To have a little index card there that says, and look, it's so embarrassing anyway. I mean, the object bears no relation to the original object anyway. So what do you put on the card? This object used to be, an object that graced the Parthenon back when it was complete and colored and everything. I'm not even sure what you'd write. But look, they should be doing a better job of interpretation. They could be doing a better job of interpretation. But to be fair to them, the British Museum, like museums everywhere, chronically underfunded. I think that's a crucial piece of this that we can never forget. Talk about what they should be doing or could be doing. It's also what they can afford to do. And George Osborne is the guy that's going to make the finances work. I think that was his bailiwick when he was chancellor. It'll be his bailiwick as chairman, and he'll make stuff happen. And so it's very important to remember that I criticize and suggest things they might be doing, but I'm not the one who has to write the check to make it happen. And maybe they don't have any money in the account, and will someday.
Yeah,
wow.
Well said.
I suspect we could go on talking for the next 2 weeks, but I'm conscious of the fact that you guys have a working day to get to. Guys, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your stories with us. It's absolutely fascinating to see the work that you guys are doing, and again, it's fascinating to see just how meaningful the work has become. It's not, again, I gave the example, people think of archaeology as fossils and really old stuff. This is having real world impact now, and it's about to have potentially a cultural impact for one of the most important issues for modern Greeks. If this comes off this year, as we suspect it might, there's going to be one hell of a party in Athens.
We'll be there. That's the one thing you can count on for sure. We'll make time for that.
We will too.
Definitely, we'll be there somewhere too. No, good stuff. Look, that was amazing. Thanks so much, Roger and Alexy. The conversation, hearing your stories, it's priceless for us. Hey, Tom.
Absolutely. And where can we find you guys, or where can people look up more about the Institute for Digital Archaeology? Our
website, for better or for worse, is digitalarchaeology.org.uk, and archaeology is spelled the British way, ARCHAEOLOGY. And we also have a Twitter feed, which is DigiArcheo, DIGIARCHAEO, which is really mostly directed at letting people kind of know what we're up to, rather than sort of cute pandas falling over, stuff like that. So I apologize for being a little bit dry. It really is a what's happening kind of feed.
No, not at all. No, it's absolutely fascinating. That was outstanding. Well, definitely, guys, make sure you visit the website there and look up the guys. You're doing fantastic work, and we can't wait to see what you guys come up with next.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this is just exactly the kind of way this project should be discussed. This is too much of this gets happens behind closed doors at universities. Guys like the two of you who get it out to the wider world. Your audience are the people who are meant to appreciate these things. It's for people who are out there living in the wide world, not for people living behind walls in universities and museums. So thank you so much for making this opportunity available to us.
Thank you for joining us. Well, Roger, Alexy, thank you so much. And Nick, what do you reckon, mate?
Yeah, I probably need to re-listen to that again. You said so much quality stuff in there, you two, and
there's a lot to unpack,
a lot to digest. Yeah, but that was brilliant. That was so informative for us as well. So thank you so much, guys.
We'll see you both in Athens very soon.
Definitely, yeah. Well, if you can get
for sure.
Are you telling us, a month maybe we should be there, or?
I think at this stage, look, and every time you say something,
I was after a scoop
shifts a little bit. But my suspicion is that very shortly after the election, there'll be an official announcement, and that this summer things will start coming back into Athens.
We'll be there July, August. So
August we'll be there. So
I'll mention that to Mr. Osborne. Let him know that for your convenience, that we should absolutely target July, August for this. But,
we appreciate it.
Let Georgie boy know we'll be there in August. So
very agreeable man.
Fantastic.
Good stuff, guys.
Dear.
Thank
Well,
you.
look, guys, uzotalk@outlook.com is the email. Follow us on most social media platforms at uzotalk and at uzo_talk on Instagram. Roger, Alexy, Nikathanasiou, thank you very much.
All right, talk to you
Take
soon.
care.
Thanks so much.
See you guys.
Ακολουθήστε μας στο Soundees, στο Spotify, στο Apple Podcasts και στο Google Podcasts.